last time I spoke about reincarnation, as you know, but there were one or two that I would like to speak about today, because one of them has to do with synchronicity, which is also very interesting, and part of the beginning of magic, I feel, when things are synchronistic. And you begin to listen and you know the universe is speaking with you. And this particular incarnation I'm going to read to you is of my mother-in-law. She was a very gentle lady, had quite a hard life, lived in Bristol, and had never been to the New Forest at all. And yet when she came to visit us on the island, she recognised the New Forest and she didn't know why. Anyway, when she was with me, she told me this story, that when she was young, about 17, 18, 19, she used to dream, and she dreamt about this man, and she could see his face very clearly. And she wondered who he was. And his face just appeared and disappeared, and that was it. One day she was walking along the road in Gloucester, where she lived at the time, and there was a man coming towards her, and it was this face. And he looked at her, and she looked at him, and they didn't say anything. They just walked past each other. However, when she came to live with me, I said to Margot, "Would you do Mother's incarnation?" And she did. And this is what she said. Her name was Gwendolyn, by the way, and she was born in 1807 in the New Forest. Her father had a small farm. Mother had worked as a servant in a large house, and they had met and fallen in love. There were 7 children, and Gwendolyn was next to the eldest. This was in that life. She had a sister that came after, but she died less than 1 year old. A brother died at 5, so there were 5 left. They had quite a happy open-air childhood, not much money for toys, made her own games and helped her mother, who taught her to cook and sew. She didn't go to school, but the brother did, and he taught her to write and add up. She was a very bright child, and at 12 was sent to the big house where her mother had worked. She became a scullery maid. And the hours were long, the work was hard, but she was always singing and happy. Plenty of time off, and slept at home, and had 2 days off a week, which was quite a lot for those days. By the time she was 14, she became a housemaid, was very happy. There were quite a number of servants, and she made friends. When she was 16, there was a Christmas servants' ball for all the servants of the surrounding large houses, and she looked forward to this. A young, very good-looking footman from an even larger house paid her attention, and arrangements were made to see him again. They used to meet on their days off, and at 19 she married him. He was promoted to butler, and they had a very small cottage in the grounds of a very large house, and they were very happy. She left work and kept house and tended the garden, kept chickens, so there was plenty to occupy her. Her first child was born 14 months later, a girl. Another girl followed shortly after. She had 4 daughters, and her husband wished for a son. The 5th was a boy, after which she was ill for a time and did not recover so quickly from the birth. Had a local woman in for a month to look after the other children. They loved each other very much and remained faithful to each other. They went to the local town to market, and by 30 she had her own horse and trap. Really it was only a cart, but fetched provisions in this and became fairly self-sufficient. Her daughters all married local men. The son joined the army, and she only saw him very occasionally. 8 grandchildren, and she was a very good grandmother. Her husband died 3 years prior to her own death at 85, a good age. She died of a fever that one of the grandchildren had been ill with. She offered to sit up with him and caught it, and he recovered and she died. And she's buried in a churchyard in a town in the New Forest, Lyndhurst, and the only name Mary Anning can give is Emma. And then she said, the face that Mother used to see in her early 20s, every time she closed her eyes, this young man was her husband in this lifetime, just related. I said she saw him I thought it was earlier, but it was in her early 20s when she saw his face. And I might tell you that she was very ill just before she died. She had a very nasty accident and broke her hip and was in hospital for a time, and she came out, and she was only out of hospital about 3 weeks when she died. But prior to her dying, she said to me, I've seen his face again, Carolyn. And I said to her, he's waiting for you, Mum. And I'm sure he met her. Bless her. Lovely love story. I love love stories. And the other one I wanted to tell you was my sister, Sue, had one incarnation done, and it happened to be on the Isle of Wight at the time of Charles I. Now, Charles I was in prison in Carisbrooke Castle, and Sue lived in Carisbrooke at the time, and this was the information that Mary Anning gave. She was born in England at the time of Charles I on the Isle of Wight. She was the daughter of an innkeeper, and there were 5 children. They had no education and ran wild, had a lovely childhood. Her mother taught her to sew and cook and do household chores, and they lived near Carisbrooke. When the king was brought to the castle as a prisoner, she was 14 years old, and she, with her younger sister, decided she had to see the king. You knew a man who worked just inside the gates, a menial task, but he smuggled them both into the castle. They were both adventurous and got right into the king's quarters. They waited till one of the guards went to lunch and then was able to speak to the king. He too had a daughter, and perhaps he thought of her as he looked at these 2 ragged children with their freedom. This was the highlight of her life, and she talked of nothing else for weeks. She married at 17 and always felt she was just a cut above all the others. With all your life. She wed a local small farmer and used to take eggs and produce with him to market. Had 3 children in succession, 4 years and then another 2, and that was it. So she had had a life on the Isle of Wight, as we all have, by the way. Margot had a life, Wally had a life, and I had a life, and we worshipped at the Longstone many hundreds of years ago. But it seems that we've all returned for some reason or another. I think it's because it's such a magical place. The next thing I want to talk to you about are a couple of synchronicities that have happened to me. And they were years and years apart. When I was young, I went to study physiotherapy at Guy's Hospital in London. And prior to that, I had lived in West Lavington in Sussex. And I used to go to church with my father at the little church there. And the vicar's name was James Pasterfield. And now my father died when I was 19. And I met this wonderful young man when I went up to London. His name was Paul Maidment. And we fell in love. and he was studying economics at university. And we got to talking one day, and we were talking about faith. And I said to him how I had been impressed by this young vicar that I had met when I was in West Lavington. And I said his name was Pasterfield. And Paul said to me, the only vicar I have ever been impressed with was the vicar at Streatham, and his name was James Pasterfield. Now that was when I was 19, 20. So that was a very strong synchronicity there. Now many, many years later, I was driving along the military road, and I had various people living with me at the Grove where I lived at the time, and one of them was Samantha, who was Paul's niece. And there was this young man hitching a ride. So I stopped, picked him up, and we got talking, and I asked him his name. And he said, he was about, I suppose he was about 21 or 22 at the time. And he said his name was James Churchward. I said, that's strange. I said, many years ago, when I was about 15 or 16, I read a book which had such an impression on me. And it was to do with Lemuria. It was called The Lost Continent of Mu. And it was by someone called James Churchward. He said, that was my great uncle. What's the chance of that? So I said, well, let's turn round. Why don't you come back home with me? We've got a party going. It's Samantha's birthday. And do you know, that young man looked very like Paul. And I couldn't believe it. And he came home with us and we had a wonderful time, wonderful party. All the young people were there and it was a great evening. The end of a lovely synchronicity. Now, the man who told me that coincidences were not coincidences, but synchronicity, was Len Stafford, and he was a minister, a Methodist minister. And I've told you about him in my previous, I'd read about him because he went to one of the ragged schools that Thomas Jackson was interested in and started. Well, Len came through to speak to Margot after he died. And this is what he had to say. What Len asked Margot to do was to recommend a reading from the Bible. And the reading was 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 1 to 5. And this was the reading. I charge thee therefore before God and the Lord Jesus Christ, who shall judge the quick and the dead at his appearing and his kingdom, preach the word. Be instant in season, reprove, rebuke, exhort with all long suffering and doctrine. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lusts shall they heap to themselves teachers, having itching ears, and they shall turn away their ears from the truth, and shall be turned into fables. But watch thou in all things, endure afflictions, do the work of an evangelist, make full proof of thy ministry. Len is telling us that he's telling us about this time now, when truth is not truth, which I found very interesting. And many of the Earthbound actually gave us biblical readings to read. And I wrote them all out. And one of the things that we were told to read was the whole book of Revelations, which seems to be coming about right now with the mark of the beast and the you're not being able to buy and sell unless you have the mark of the beast, and all those things. But I won't mention that in this. And then Margot told me that she'd been to the old church. Not the old church, no, the new church at Bond Church. And while she was sitting there quietly, she heard a voice. And it was the voice of one of the previous vicars, and his name was Edmund Carr. And this is what he had to say. He was the vicar of Bond Church from 1857, and she sat alone in the church in August 1978. But not only did he speak, but he also attempted to make himself visible, succeeding to a degree as she was able to see a misty figure by the altar and the pulpit. And this is what he said. The power of the Lord is untold. I have prayed that one day I may preach again in the church I loved, to the people I loved. I rose to a higher dwelling, yet I retained the love of my earthly life. Now a voice from the past is heard in my church. Praise ye the Lord's name be praised. How many times did I preach to a congregation of wealthy and humble souls? How many times did I pray my words would fall on fertile soil? Now someone can write what I wish people to hear. Many times I have walked around my church since I left my earthly life, to dwell among the lights that are but the thoughts of millions of souls. I wished that when I lived, I had delivered a sermon to be outstanding. I have, in my spirit form, walked up the aisle to the altar. I have mounted the pulpit and stood by the lectern. Yet no one had seen me. No one had heard me. Now I have been heard and seen, and am thankful. The souls who were in my congregation were not much different in temperament to the souls who are in the congregation now. Time is meaningless. The same sermons for different seasons, the harvest festival and Christmas. The next time the one who writes and hears my voice and hears my words attends this church, I shall preach the sermon I so often wished to, but thought it would be incongruous if I had done so. And he began to teach by the seaside. Mark chapter 4, verse 1. So shall I try to teach by the seaside. The sea, so powerful. I can see men trying to harness the sea as they would harness a horse. Therefore are men trying to harness God for their own will, and not by the will of God. Man will not triumph over the sea ever, or he would have triumphed over God. I see the future where men try and fail. The hand of the Lord is shown by destroying thousands by the all-powerful sea. When man learns to live in peace, not only with one another, but by accepting God as it was meant that he should, and not try to force his will over God and his wonderful ways, so will heaven reign on earth. Whether people live on earth now, or in the future, or in the past, the laws of the Almighty are the same, and for the highest to the lowest, the arrogant and the weak. So shall the laws be the same, so shall all be blessed. As the tide goes in and out, so do the lives of men, backwards and forwards, birth, death and rebirth. The Almighty possesses the power that surpasses all. May these words fall upon fertile soil, the minds of thinking men, not like the seeds that the sower sowed upon stony ground, the mind of the man who listens not, or the seed scorched by the sun, the man who forgets all that was told him. Therefore I pray that man may think before he speaks, think before he invents, and think before he prays. May the blessing of the Lord be upon all who hear this that I am trying to preach. The barrier is between us, yet my spirit enters this lovely church, which I loved during my life. I walk to the altar and give thanks that I have had the opportunity to be heard and seen. I shall no longer trouble the one who is hearing me to write, as I leave to dwell among the angels. God bless you. Edmund Carr. Now, many years later, in 1982, I moved to the Grove, and it looked like a vicarage. And I was going through the deeds one morning, sitting in my breakfast room. I had them all out in front of me, and I'm looking at all the people that had lived in my house. And who do I find? Edmund Carr, the vicar. It had been a vicarage for about 14 years, and he had lived in my home. I thought, what on earth is going on? Anyway, the Grove was in a dreadful state when we bought it. It had a crack from top to bottom. It hadn't been touched inside for 44 years. The man who owned it had never spent a penny on it. And so paper was hanging off the wall, the damp was on the walls. Oh, it was dreadful. And there was an old scullery that had originally been a kitchen, I should think, at some time. But he had moved out of the scullery and made another room into a scullery. And I decided that I didn't want this as the kitchen. I would turn it into something else, another room, and we would turn the original scullery back into a kitchen. So after working very hard, we turned this old scullery back into a lovely sitting room, and it was my study. And there had originally been a door going through into the sitting room. When we knocked the wall down, we found that there was a doorway. The doorway was still there, the wood was still there. And we found the door upstairs in the attic, which we put back in place, so we had access to the sitting room from the study. And it was in the study that Margot and I used to sit and have all sorts of meetings and visions and various things. Anyway, I learnt that this study had been Edmund Carr's study, and he had written many of his sermons in there. And I did ask Margot when she was able to answer questions, because there was a time when she could answer questions, and I asked her if Edmund Carr was still around, and they said no, he'd gone on to a much higher plane and was no longer he was never earthbound, but he'd lost his love of the physical, and so he'd gone on to a higher plane. But I felt so blessed to have that as my study, and knew that that wonderful man had spent so many hours there himself. Absolute magic. I wouldn't call myself a Christian in the normal sense, but we've had a lot of vicars speak to us over the years. But I must tell you one little incident. I was out rescuing an earthbound soul one day in Gatcombe, and we'd been to the church, the little church in Gatcombe, and we were walking along the road afterwards, and we met a vicar. And I just mentioned that we'd been what we'd been doing, and I said that Margot heard them speak to her, and he said, "Oh, she should be in that place over there," which is Whitecroft, which was. But some people don't want to hear, and so it's best not to say anything. However, there's another vicar who I'm very fond of, and he spoke to us many, many times, and he followed whatever we were doing in our lives. He would mention things that were happening in our lives. So I thought I would read you some of the things that he said to us. This is I might tell you, this is my very old book with all my original notes in. So it's rather worn out. However, this vicar's name was Francis Bamford, and he was the vicar of Newchurch. He was also the rural dean of East Wight. He died in 1934, so that was 2 years before I was born. And Margot and Wally and I used to go to the church at regular intervals once he had spoken to us. I haven't got his original script, but Margot decided that I was the one who would keep the information that Francis Bamford was giving us, and so I thought I would read you some of what he had to say. How happy you have made me, my faithful children. He always called us his children. That you have returned just to hear me speak, as you have already been told there was no earthbound soul ready for release. I wish to speak, to tell of Christmas. You see, far too many people just think of it as a time of eating, drinking, and giving presents. There is more to it than that, and as you will read in the Bible, especially the beginning of Matthew, the angel of the Lord appeared. Some say to Joseph in a dream, others say a waking vision. So shall you, who hears me and has this God-given gift, who I may add so many ignorant folk would deny, you too shall have a vision of an angel, and it will be when you least expect it. You will be helped to draw it, and each one of you shall have a copy to keep forever. This shall be a sign. A few days later, Margot went into her sitting room, do some dusting, and standing in the corner of the sitting room was an angel. And he stood the full height of the room, and he had a star in his hand. And she fell down on the floor with her head on the carpet in absolute awe and wept. It affected her so much. Anyway, she was helped to draw it, and she said, I'm no artist, Carolyn, but this is the picture that she drew. And then he carried on. I know the lady with you, who has deep faith, is sad one of her beloved children is to leave home. But I say to her, take comfort in the knowledge the girl goes off, knowing more of spiritual truth than most girls, and this is better than any material thing she may have. Now, my faithful children, I would like to see you in my church singing, but I know it is a long journey and cold at night, so I shall understand if you are not in the congregation of less faithful souls. But who knows, you may come. If not, I wish you all joy, love and peace. God bless you all, and look for the angel of the Lord. That was in 1980, 18th of December 1980. And this was October 1982. Of course, we were always busy. It has been a long time since you have all visited me in my church. You came at regular intervals and then the visits stopped. Others came, then once one came without the other two. Now I cannot tell you how very pleased I am to see the three who were meant to work together back here, and to show you how the triangle is so important. Or perhaps you think of it as a trinity. You will receive a sign before leaving here. I know how you've all had much work to do. Perhaps get your house in order. And now it is in order in your mind. I hope to see you here together many times. There are still many who through greed or disobedience have remained trapped. Yet I am told that you cannot help them until the spring. Yet perhaps in church you are permitted to continue your work. So may I suggest that at some future date you visit Carisbrooke Church, where some poor woman needs help. I know you all have great love and compassion for those who need it, so I give you all my love. I, once more, in the realms of the holiest of lights, I gaze upon you of the Trinity and give my blessing. Do not forget to seek the sign. My gift to you all and my personal blessing. Well, we searched for the sign and searched, and then he came through again. We found it, and this is what it was. Would you like to put that? And he continued, My apologies for taking so long. I had not realised it was so difficult, but at least I was able to make a sound you all heard, which was excellent, as it is hard for you to describe how real the voices are. The symbol I chose was the shape of a triangle with the laurel leaves of the victorious, perhaps, as one of your Trinity said, or perhaps, as one of your Trinity said, flames. The flames signify light, which is so important to you all. Do not despise this cheap bit of metal, but keep it as memory of one who cares for you special people. I shall speak again when you return sometime, and remember, the power is there with the faith, and the faith gives the power. Stay as a Trinity. And this is called an apport, when Spirit brings something to you from another dimension. And it was found after a loud noise on the blue carpet by the altar rail near the picture of Francis Bamford. Now, the next time we went was in November 1982. Meditate and pray with love and peace in your hearts, my dear children. I am pleased you have returned. I am aware you went to the church where I sent you and helped another soul onward through to the next plane, and then I hope onwards and onwards, never to look back. This should be a lesson on never look back. Always look and go forward. Remember in the Bible how Lot's wife looked back. Not that any of you will be turned into a pillar of salt, but to go onwards with the light of Christ in your eyes is what is meant by these words. You were all so very privileged to be surrounded by the light when you helped a man up on the downs. Oh yes, I know much of what you do, and I am very happy that you all chose to work together again. You remind me of 3 prongs in an electric plug. You generate power. Now, if you wish to work to help a soul sometime soon, there are other churches beside the Church of England. There is a Catholic church at Knighton and one at Shanklin. Both have souls trapped in or around them, so therefore you may choose to visit one. All religions lead to God, practiced with love and faith. I wish you to see a silver circle before you leave. You will if you look close enough, no matter if you cannot. I so enjoy speaking to you. I wish you to show the others proof, as they cannot hear me as you do, but, thank God, they have the faith to believe in me and in you, and above all in the great God. So, my dears, I will just say, God bless you all. Well, we did find a silver circle. And there it is. A silver sixpence. Just a simple silver sixpence, and that was it. This was in January 1983. Thank you for coming back here, my dear children. I have been sending out thoughts for you to return, as it is good for me as well as your good selves for all this type of communication. One or two things to say. One, you are all like little churches walking around. Each knows much about religion, and each have their own ideas, and all are right in many ways. Never let the so-called learned people try to alter your persuasions. You are a powerful three, or trinity, as you refer to yourselves, and you, the writer, very powerful. Now, I know the other lady, Carolyn, has much to bear at present, and is about to send a beloved child across the world, with hope and faith, but sadness in her heart. Tell her that it is the will of God that the young lady is to travel, and she will be wiser for the experience. Time passes, and in this passage of time there is plenty of useful work to be accomplished in the spiritual sense. For you and your husband, I see much more work, much travel to be done, and hopefully a journey to a very important holy place on the tour. Now be of good heart. As soon as the weather improves, and with love and faith, help the earthbound and seek out an important holy place in this church for my own personal sign to you. Bless you all, my children. Well, I was about to say goodbye to my daughter Susie, who was emigrating to Australia. She had recently married. She'd married a young man who was born in Australia, so they didn't have to go through all the paraphernalia of emigrating. They could just get on a plane and go. She and I were very close. She had already done her nursing in her orthopaedic nursing in Gloucestershire, where she'd met him. And I was very sad she was going, because it was a long way away in those days, and there was no hope of me going and not much hope of her returning either then. And we searched all round the church and couldn't find anything. And as you go into the church, there are two chapels on either side. There's the Bamford chapel on the right and the Dillington chapel on the left. And the Dillington were a very important family in the new church area. And I went into the Dillington chapel, and right in the middle of the altar in the Dillington chapel there was a 5-cent Australian piece. There it is. I burst into tears because it was so moving, so very moving. So this man obviously cares very deeply for us. And it, again, in September 1983, I know, my dear children, that you've had a disappointment, but no matter, all souls have to suffer from time to time, and you have all had such faith in all the messages, not only from me, a humble clergyman, but from other spirits, some on a very high plane. But the faith to set out that morning was great, and a good seed was sown, and I hope will grow in due course to bear fruit. Do not forget to seek the symbolic seed. A joke, of course. Why should we not enjoy our little bit of merriment? Life must not always be dull. Now I also know how you went to the field and heard the soul from another planet, at least his spirit, a soul most friendly, and I am pleased that a link has been formed, as it shows great faith from you special 3 people to accept and have no fear. It was unfortunate that you, the writer, have had to suffer pain, but others, including the greatest of all psychics, have suffered pain. So just realise you are in good company. One day you will visit the real place, but in the meantime, dear children, make do with the little hill at Knighton. Oh yes, I know about it. I put the right thought in all your heads at times, especially in times of stress. Now goodbye for this time, and may you all receive blessings from God. Now he's talking about, we were disappointed. We were going to Glastonbury, but it didn't happen because we got halfway. We got halfway along the military road, and Margot suddenly got this strange pain in her throat. And she said, I don't feel very good. It wasn't a sore throat, it was just something that was there that was stuck in her throat, and she just didn't feel that she wanted to go off to the mainland like that. So she went back home again. And it also mentions that we had heard from a soul from another planet. Well, this was obviously when we began to hear from beings from elsewhere in the universe, which we've had a great many communications from since. But what happened, when she got home and she looked in her throat, there was like a dark black splinter in her throat that obviously, she said it had been put there to stop me going. So we couldn't go. And that was it. But there was a little place, a little hill just outside of Knighton. That was a place that was holy. And we went there. And we used to go and sit there just to meditate and get information. So he's aware of everything we do in our lives. This was in 1985. Now, this was June the 6th, 1985. And I have to tell you that on June the 3rd, 1985, we had a terrible accident at my home. And one of the young men who was living there, he was 22 years old, very beautiful young man. We had found a well in the garden. And being young and foolish, as you usually are when you're that age, he wanted to go down the well. We'd discovered it. We were doing something on the patio, and we'd picked up this great big stone and seen this well underneath it, and he wanted to go down the well. Well, he did go down the well, and unfortunately the well collapsed on him and he died. And it was very tragic. And Margot said to me, would you like to go to New Church a couple of days later, 3 days later? And this was while they were digging. I must tell you, what happened is that there were some tunnellers on the island, and they're the finest tunnellers in the world, and they're Irish, and they come from an island off Ireland, and they were just happened to be working at Seaview, and they were called in to dig a tunnel down alongside the well in order to get Ramunus's body out. And they were absolutely amazing. And they built a 5-foot tunnel beside where the well had collapsed, and they built it down. It took them 5 days and 5 nights to do this. And eventually they did succeed. But in the meantime, Margot suggested we went to New Church to hear what Francis Bamford had to say. And he said, "Welcome, my dear children, after a long absence. I am very pleased you have come at the time when tragedy has struck. Here there is a feeling of peace, and I say to you that not only in life there is death, but in death there is life." The arm you saw outstretched was symbolic, the arm of protection. I cannot say whether the young man is still alive. I would not wish to let words come that is not for any of you to hear. But whether there is life or not, hope is there, and hope is important. Prayer, thoughts, or hope share the same compartment of life. Some preachers would not agree with me, but you know I am different. Have I not proved this? With this hope, there must be genuine love, and there is much of this at the present moment in time. The three of you are powerful together, more than any group I know, and I know of many. So live with this, and you, the writer, the most powerful of all, loved by the angels, so lift up your head and lead the others. I know that these words cannot bring comfort to the one of you who loves this young man so much, but they are meant with kindness, and to know this is important. Whatever the outcome, it is the will of the Lord, and may he bless you all. Return again within a week or 2. Farewell for now. That, if you like to show, that picture is Remunus, the young man who died.
Which picture?
The picture on the far right up there.
Mm-hmm.
He's with my daughters, and that was just before he died. And the 14th of June, I am pleased you have returned, my children, as there is another who wishes to speak to you when I have finished. Last time you were here was a time of worry and grief, especially for Carolyn. Now the grief will be fading, or should be, and I say, remember the young man with love, but let him go onward, and do not allow any of the young people in the house to dwell upon it any more. The day was not set for the earthbound you had intended. Time is not right yet. You are doing a worthwhile work, and I hope the light that shines from you will continue for many, many years. The soul who wishes to speak is not exactly earthbound, but just occasionally. Now enjoy nature, the insects, the birds, and the flowers. This is important to you all, the things of God, and not of man. Farewell, my dear children, and God bless you all. And on the 8th of June, Mary Anning, Margot's guide, came through with a message. And she said, the mists have cleared, and I can see now clearly that the young man who you knew as Remunus is now resting before going on to the halls of learning for a short time. I do not think he will have to reincarnate, but will go onwards. You are correct in thinking that he and Carolyn knew each other in another life, and I will tell you more of this later. Meanwhile, Carolyn should seek comfort among growing things. In October 85, welcome once again, my children. I have been to a much higher place and seen the God of creation since you were here last. And I can only say to you that the way you nearly worship stones is the greatest thing you can do. If you study the formation of stones, you will know that Revelations chapter 4 is the description that was a vision of reality in the first few verses. So the fish is not just Christianity, but as you can know, the sardine. Now the sardine is a stone. It's called sardius, and I believe it's also, there's another name for it as well. And I can't quite remember it at the moment, but it's a red stone, not like ruby, more a reddy orange coloured stone. Now to your minds, you all want knowledge. You are getting it, and to sit here for a few moments in time will allow your minds, each of you, to realise what you want and to go towards it. Now, as there are things happening in this locality, I cannot give you anything in this church, but later upon your work, which I presume you will have, your walk, which I presume you will have, I will show you a stone, which is the centre of a cross, which should not be there at all. More explanation one day, but not yet. Tranquility is what all are striving for, and to reach one's goal is to receive the tranquility of the mind. Now go your way, and bless you all, dear children. I am pleased you came. And there was a Celtic cross in the churchyard. It was obviously somebody's gravestone. And in the round part of the Celtic cross at the top, there was a cross, a Celtic cross with a blue stone in it. Now, it had been put there for us by Francis. And inside, and it also, the Celtic cross also had fish symbols on it, which was very pertinent to what we'd just been told. And it said on the cross, on the circular bit of the cross, "He, being dead, yet speaketh." Amazing. Beautiful synchronicity. So we went back again in November. How nice to see you here again so soon, my dear children. I welcome you and know you followed instructions and read the parts of the Bible I told you of. Also, you found the stone in its way, which in its way is important. You have also read Exodus, which may be a little misleading, as the priests of old gained power from the stones, but used the power in the wrong way. So the two unknown stones were removed from the earth by the Creator. A stone of importance, you may like to think of him. Now the stone you found, although worthless, was the nearest colour to the stone Thummim. Now the two stones that were removed were the Urim and Thummim, because the priests were abusing the power that they held. Now, having studied Revelations and learnt more about the stones and the angels, you left your body and saw what you thought was a sun. This was not so. It was a glowing stone, the beginning and the end, the Alpha and Omega. This was the most important of all experiences you have had so far. The time was right for this. Time is unimportant, yet very important. You will be shown the importance of the word time. Now, leaving the Matthew, Mark, Luke and John alone, study Revelations again, and also Ezekiel, which deals with those of other planets. Study the primitive races in the old days and the stone circles, and more knowledge will be gained. Remember, my children, you gain knowledge, and you who is so gifted and right can teach the others that no one else can do in such a way. Regain your strength now by walking in the field, and time is important. Farewell for now, and the stones give forth love. We were walking in the field, and we found a timepiece, a pocket watch. Margot told me that her out-of-body experience approaching the sun, in inverted commas, she felt heat from its centre, but the rays which were wiggly were icy cold. The shape was oval rather than round. So over and over again, we were told to read the book of Revelations, and so many people are speaking about it at this time, at the time we're going through at this present moment in time. And and I think it is important. I think it's important to read both Revelations and Ezekiel, because Ezekiel, he saw beings from a craft from another planet, as we understand it. I have been asked if Margot has ever returned since she passed. Well, she has. And it's very joyful, really, because I was delighted to hear what she had to say, and I do have the words that she has said to Mary here. This was her first return on December the 16th, 2010. Now, I'm not quite sure of the year that Margot died, because of course I wasn't working with her. I stopped working with her in 1994, and I didn't see a lot of her after that. However, Margot and Mary and I had worked together on our lives in Lemuria and ancient Egypt, working through crystal scrying. And Mary, she was sitting at her table in her dressing gown, having her morning cup of tea. When she heard a voice, Mary's living in Ireland, by the way, and the voice said, "Hello, Mary, I've just woken up." Mary said, "Hello, Margot, so have I." And Margot said to her, "It's lovely here. I didn't know what to expect. Oh dear, we worry so much on Earth. You're doing all right. Well done. Wally is with me. Come here, Wally, and say hello to Mary. You remember Dudley Road? We're all so young again. Tell Carolyn I love her. I should have told her, but Wally and I travel now back to all our old haunts. The channelings will be published at the right time. Lovely to chat. Bye." Mary said, "I'll call Carolyn." But by the time she'd gone. And the channelings that they were referring to was the book of channeling, which I have done, which is called Words in Transformation, and it was published in 2018. So that was her first return. Her second return was again to Margot when I was staying over there. And we were sitting down in Mary's healing room with all her crystals around us. And she said to me, "Would you like a drink?" And I said, "I think I might." She said, "Would you like a Protestant glass or a Catholic glass?" I said, "I think I'd better have a Protestant glass, Mary. Catholic glass is about that big. Protestant glass is like that, you see. Mary's Catholic." And so we were sitting there, and she said, "Margot's here." And this is what Margot said. "Well, it's about time the two of you got together again. You could say I've been sitting on a cloud, but I haven't. I've been watching the pair of you. I'm delighted about the book, Carolyn. You're doing a great job on it. Mary, I had to come into church tonight just to tell you I'm so slim. I'm as slim as can be, and so young you wouldn't know me. Wally has fallen in love with me all over again." And that is I have to say something about the magic of synchronicity, because I picked up another book shortly after that, and I will read you what it said. It's from a book called The Awakening Letters, and I was at page 60 and read, this is about people who have passed over and are communicating with Lady Cynthia Sands. You can't imagine my joy at having got through death. It was so simple, so beautiful, and so life-giving. I became young again immediately. I was slender and agile and gay. I was dancing and throwing myself about as much as I could. How wonderful. Let's all go there. She said, I've been coming and going all the time, but it is time now to think about something else. You must take the communicator down. Now, the communicator is the crystal. It's a large quartz crystal that Mary has always used to communicate with. And when she looks into the crystal, she can see the face of the communicator. And sometimes he comes to the surface and speaks, and sometimes she has to go right into the crystal and speak with him. This is what we used to do when we were scrying. You must take the communicator down. He's always there. He has gone deep into the crystal. You've picked it up. I've seen you doing it. And you've asked him to come to the surface. He's not coming to the surface again. He's staying where he is, because that is where you've got to go. Deep down and find where we left off a long time ago. The journey now is going to be quite exciting. You may say that we started things, but then you were distracted, I was distracted, we all were. But that is life. Now we must come together again, and we three were the pyramid. And so when you sit, I will be at the opposite side of the room, and we are the pyramid again. We go within again, and we can see all the things we saw before. What's your brain, Mary? You've forgotten this. Mary said, Oh, I'm so busy, Margot. I'm really busy. I can't go backwards or forwards. And Margot said, It's going forwards in time now, and it's going to be exciting too, because I know. And I couldn't get the rest of what she said there. I wander round your garden, and it wasn't your friend that got the glass out without breaking it. I was at the other side holding it. So you see, we are always there. Mary has a pyramid in her garden, and one of the glass pieces at the very top of the pyramid had broken, and her friend was trying to get it out so that it didn't damage it. And Margot was saying I was there helping as well. Yes, I've seen your Mick. That's Mary's husband, who died in 91. He's always around you and looking after you too. Now remember when you did the astral travelling and you did see some dreadful things? Well, maybe you would consider going back again. You can go back any time. Don't stay too long. You know what will happen. There are beautiful colours and energy all around your place, and the violet flame surrounds you. I wasn't well before I passed. I would have liked to communicate with you, but I wasn't able to. It's a funny thing that when you're coming to the end of your life, nothing seems to matter apart from moving on and meeting the people that have gone before you. And I know, and I knew that Wally was waiting for me. So that was her second communication. She did mention other things about the communicator and the work that Mary has to do in the future. And the third time she came back was very recently. It was in September 2020, and she came back to speak to Robin. Now, Robin is the other channel that I've worked with since 1995, and he has channeled cosmic information from that time. But recently, he was told that the channeling would stop for a period of time. That was in 2018, and he's only had very little communication since those days. But he is beginning to receive information again, And it's in a completely different way. And Margot said in 2020, Robin, you are to work in a certain way, and this way will come to you soon. Don't worry about the past, as it has no relevance on the new future. God bless you, and love all things, Margot. He has felt her around. And I said to him the other day, I do hope Margot's around when I'm talking about her. He said, I've no doubt she will be. So I'm hoping that she is. So those were her short messages that we've had since she passed. Robin did start working in a completely different way. Up until now, he has received communication and spoken the communication without a pause. When he's channeling, there is absolutely no pause at all, and he will channel for 8, 10, 15 minutes non-stop, sometimes longer. However, that did cease, and just recently he's had to pick up a pencil, just as Margot did, and write. And it just comes in short bits of information for him. And he now keeps journal and writes everything down. And he does hear as well, but he said the other day he was out cycling, and he said he had a whole download, and it was all about consciousness. But he said, I couldn't stop because I was cycling with a group. And so he's trying to remember and tell me everything that he heard, but I haven't actually recalled all that yet. The one thing I wanted to read to you was, I went to New Church in 2017, and I went to see Francis Bamford's grave. It's right outside. He lived at the rectory, which was behind the church. Lovely old house, which has been totally restored. And from the rectory into the churchyard, there is a gate from the garden into the churchyard. And beside the gate, there is Francis Bamford's grave. I went with my friend Aurea, and we'd gone to lunch at the Pointers Inn and took a stroll round New Church churchyard. I intended to sit quietly in the church, but the cleaners were there along with 3 of the choir. So it was obvious I was not meant to be in there at all. The day was a little blustery with the promise of rain in the air. And I walked round the back of the church and took the path made of the old gravestones along the wall backing onto the old vicarage. It began to rain, and I sheltered under one of the old spreading chestnut trees. And while standing there, I had the impression to visit the grave of Francis Bamford, who had communicated with us so long ago, when Margot, Wally and I were a trinity, working for Spirit in the 1980s. He lived in the vicarage when he was vicar of New Church, and his spirit spoke to us on numerous occasions until he eventually progressed to a higher sphere and was no longer able to do so. The shower passed, and I made my way to the grave, and it was completely overgrown. And I pulled all the ivy away, and I thought, I know Francis Bamford's name is here somewhere. And as I pulled the ivy away, and I continued to pull it away, I saw another name which I'd never noticed before. And it was Hugh Bamford of Perth, Australia. Now my daughter lives in Perth, Australia. And so when Francis Bamford told me that he knew my daughter was going away, he too had suffered as I had suffered because his son went to Australia. And I just said, memories flooded back of my own daughter Susie leaving for Australia, and the tears I shed at her departure, never knowing when I would see her again. and Francis never knew when he would see his son again. And so that was a little synchronicity that I'd never seen in the 80s. I'd seen the grave, but I hadn't actually scraped away everything on the grave. And so I began with synchronicity, and I end with synchronicity. I could read you one, if I can find one more. I could read you a little something. By the way, this is my guide. Her name was Frances Willard, and she was an American. And she grew up in a family where her father desired to be a minister. And he took classes at Oberlin College to further his dream. Her mother also took classes with him. However, due to the advice of a doctor, her father stopped going to school and instead moved his family out to Jamesville, Wisconsin Territory. As a child, Willard was a tomboy, having short hair. She insisted on being called Frank as a child. There was no school for Frances to attend, and as her father saw to legislative duties, her mother began to school her. Her education was continued inconsistently. She attended a girls' school for one semester, and as she grew older, she was resentful that her brother was allowed to vote and she was not able. And in 1857, she started to attend the Milwaukee Female College. However, after one term, her father transferred her to the Northwestern Female College in Evanston, Illinois. She graduated in 1859 as a laureate of science. Anyway, she spoke to me, and she said, "The brave captain, dear man," that was Captain Bennett, Margot's guide, "so gallant, has permitted me to speak with you, so that you may pass on advice and a message to the woman I love in so strong a spiritual sense." Margot heard this in an American accent, by the way. "I have tried to guide her well, and I do know her life appears as if it is at a crossroads. She dislikes much about it, and I admit I am at fault here, as I have tried hard all her life to keep her away from strong drink, yet there she is, where it is being served among people who smoke and laugh at inane jokes. This is my fault. She does not care for this way. Her powers are developing, and she is a very spiritual person." We had opened a restaurant. We'd been in an antique and second-hand shop for a long, long time, and Reggie's friend had decided that perhaps it might be an idea if we opened a restaurant. So we opened a restaurant and called it O. Henry's. Unfortunately, it only ran for one season. I think our life would have been, I'd have ended up in divorce courts. It was not us at all, but it was very popular. And, of course, there was I, working in it. The cottage she likes, I'd decided to move by now, and I'd been looking at properties, and I'd found this beautiful little cottage called Mulberry Cottage in Ventnor, and I really loved it. And I said to Margot, "Do you think that could possibly be my cottage?" I was going to move from the Grove, this great big house. Oh no, it wasn't. I was moving from the shop that we were in, and it was a great big place. And I loved this cottage. Anyway, Frances decided the cottage she likes is not necessarily the one she will have. We are not here to predict the future. A good guide feels deeply about this and only does it if necessary. We are not the essence of spiritual light, and any large house with quiet surroundings would suit her just as well. But she has a husband to consider, and that must be one of the important things in her life, as well as her children. But time will come when they will leave to set up home in their own. So please tell her to listen to her inner self, as I guide strongly from the inner self, as cannot speak to direct to her. She will know exactly what to do, and the time will arrive very soon when she will make up her mind. Tell her of my love for her, and thank you for listening. So that was my guide, Frances Willard. Of course, she's still with me. She will care for me and look after me until such time as I move on to the other side. I've heard from her quite a few times. I do have other guides as well, one of whom is Sarah Trimmer, who was one of the founders of the Christian Sunday School, as well as an apologist, a person who argues in defence or justification of something, such as a doctrine, policy, or institution. In the case of Trimmer, she wrote about Christianity. In the 19th century, she became one of the most influential people involved in the education and literature for children. So she is another of my guides that's obviously kept me on the straight and narrow, not on the Christian church path, but on the Christ consciousness path. That's where I come from. So that's just a little snippet of things that have been given to me over the years. And there will always be more, and as I say, next week I will possibly speak about crop circles and the extraterrestrials, if the interest is there.